René is a professional speaker, business coach, and best-selling author who has published 2 books. And her intentions in writing her books were to share her insights about leadership, purpose, and reaching your potential in life and business. Let's welcome René.
Thank you. I look forward to this. I've gained so many tidbits from Shiraz and Deb and Doreen, and it's been really insightful. So thank you all who came before me. And I don't have a workshop, for instance, the Shiraz's and Doreen's, but and I don't have a psychology background, but I could say from my 45 years of experience in nature and the outdoors, there's a lot of psychology that goes on in the outdoors and the transformation it does for people. And so I thought I'd start with how I got into this business of loving the outdoors and using it as my business in my whole life. And when I was in college, I had an opportunity to join 13 other students on an expedition to spend a semester traveling about the country and going to different outdoor education centers and environmental education centers and spending a month in the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, so I had never seen a mountain before, let alone climb a mountain. So this was a big deal for most of us. So I took a big bus and traveled across the country from the Chicago area and ended up in Wyoming. And we learned about how to pack a pack, how to build a fire, how to pitch a tent, where to pitch a tent, how to protect the natural environment. And about halfway through this month-long expedition, we learned how to rappel and climb our first mountain, learned how to rock climb, but also technically climb our first mountain. Well, the mountain was a little over 12,000 feet in elevation, and we took small groups, and our guide, his name was Jan, took us up this mountain, and we didn't leave until early in the afternoon, and this was October 1st, 1977. And I know this date because it had such a major impact on my life and my trajectory of where I now saw my life going. And he had already taken a group of small people up this peak, and they'd come down, so he's ready to take the next group up. So we had to trek over to the base of this mountain and then set up different pitches, rope links to get to the top of this mountain. There's 3 rope links to get to the top. And I happened to be the last in line. So I'm watching everybody before me. And you know what this is like, everybody. Times that you have been the last person in line watching other people, and you're anticipating and you're building up the fear and the doubt of what it's going to be like to do something. Well, I was that person. And I used every part of my body and the fear of climbing this peak and grabbing onto rock holds and all the way to the top. And by the time we all got to the top, it was about right before dusk. And so it was really, the sun had gone down and we could still see, but not very well. And our guide only had one flashlight. And he set up the rappels and we all rappelled down. And by the time we got to the base of the mountain, it was pitch dark and we only had one flashlight among all of us. So we had to trek our way through a boulder field and then through some willows and back to our campsite where the rest of the group was waiting for us with a roaring campfire. And everybody was so worried for us, wondering if we had made it, if we had, were alive, if anybody was injured. And for good reason. It was 11:30 at night and 16 degrees out on October 1st, 1977. And everybody was exhausted. But I had awakened the next morning and I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I had never been so sure of anything up until that point. I was a typical college student bumbling around with what everybody else was doing. Whatever my friends were doing, I was doing. Whatever was trendy, I was doing. Whatever seemed to be popular, that's what I was doing. And I was sort of just as I mentioned, bumbling around with everybody else. And this is the first time in my life that I thought, I am now me. I am now separate from that. I didn't know what I didn't know before that time. And it was less about climbing the mountain, but it was more about what happened here in my spirit. So much that I wanted to share this with other people, not because I wanted to tell everybody I climbed a mountain. It was more about sharing what was going on here. And those of you who have a specific insight or a specific gift or something that really, really charges your spirit, you know what that's like. You know that that's something that you want to not keep to yourself. You want to give it away. And so this energy and this enthusiasm and this passion was such a driving force in my life, is that I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. Money was not an issue. Where I lived was not an issue. I just wanted to do this. So eventually I became a professor and spent 30 years taking people around the world on adventures and expeditions and climbing mountains and rafting rivers and doing whitewater boating and everything that you could imagine doing. I was that person getting the initial training and then turning other people onto not only the outdoors, but helping them recognize who they are and what they're capable of doing and being. And it's been magical because it's something that happened in me. So the first book that I wrote, which is Reaching Your Potential, Achieving Your Potential, 15 Empowering Steps to Reach Each Summit. And I identify a summit in this book about a mountain summit, but it's really applicable and metaphorical to any other summit in people's lives. If you want to be the richest person on the planet, that's your summit. If you want to build your business and write a book, that's your summit. Whatever your aspiration and goals are, is what I help people to identify as their summit. So it's a dream, an aspiration, a goal, an insight, something that you want to accomplish. And so this is the very first book that I wrote, and it was through a publishing company called Itty Bitty. There is actually a company called Itty Bitty. And it took me a week to write this book because I was so passionate about it. And the reason why I was passionate about it is because about 6 weeks before this opportunity came about, I had come back from Nepal, having climbed my highest and hardest mountain I've ever climbed. It's called Island Peak, and it's a little over 20,000 feet in elevation. And I have been at altitude many times and taken other people out, but I've never been to this altitude before. Everest, the top of Everest, is 29,035 feet. This is 9,000 feet lower than that, but it felt like it was my Mount Everest. It didn't have to be the Mount Everest, but it was my Mount Everest. And that's sort of the idea that I help people in coaching, is that you identify what your Everest is. And this is a mountain I dreamed about for 20 years. And I thought, why am I not doing this? And I go back to Shiraz, like, why is this not happening? Do I really want to do it? Is this something that's important to me? And I kept coming up with excuses like, oh, I'm taking, students to Nepal. I don't have time. I can't afford it. It's too long for me I have to be there a month to be able to get to this peak. And eventually, once I retired from being a professor, I thought, well, now I have the time. Here we go. And I was so thrilled to be standing on the top of this peak of something that I had dreamed about for over 20 years. And I came back and was just on fire about this. So bing, bing, when you have the passion, people, you know this, you can do just about anything. And I was so passionate about my experience that I wrote this book in less than a week. And it's a pretty straightforward book, but it helps people to, first of all, identify what their summit is. What do you have out there? What do you want to accomplish? And then why? That's the biggest thing, right? Simon Sinek talks about the why, the value of why. Well, yeah, why do you want to do this? Why do I want to climb this peak? Why do you want to make, $1 zillion? Why do you want to write a book? What's the purpose behind it? And it has to be here. It has to come from here. Why? Not for anybody else, not because somebody said you have to write a book to be able to speak, or it has to come from you. And then once that occurs, then it's about, planning and preparation and finding your compass and reflecting on that process, and then celebrating, and not only celebrating your accomplishments, but bringing all those people together and not forgetting about those people who have helped you, climb that peak or reach that summit, whatever that might be. Not to forget about those people, to recognize those people along the way. So it's a pretty logical book, I think. But it's a great book to put on a coffee table, on a place in the dentist office, helping people to really help recognize their summit and how to get there, really step-by-step process. And then once I got back from that, and this is during COVID, so this is a great time to be writing books, right? There's not a whole lot going on, not a whole lot of traveling to speaking events and so forth. And that's shortly after that, I got excited about, finishing that book. And then I wrote my second book, which is called Unflappable. And one of the things I want, people are wondering how to title their book. And this was my experience. I don't have any knowledge of, what is supposed to happen out there. But I wrote my book before I actually came up with a title. And that's because as I was writing, I was thinking about what it is that I wanted to say. What's the premise of this book? And it started with an experience I had on that first expedition when I was in college. Shortly after that, I had an opportunity to lead a group of people on a climb, that same mountain that I had climbed that I was just so thrilled about. And it really changed and transformed my life and the direction of my life. And weather was coming in, a storm was coming in. And I wasn't sure whether it was safe for me to take these people up this peak or not. And I would go around the corner of this peak and look at the weather in the west, and it looked dark, but it could have been blowing over. And I came back, and the group was just sitting there patiently waiting for me to make a decision. And about a half an hour later, I decided, I think it's best that we just, pack up our gear and head back to base camp. And one of the women, who was twice my age and a PhD, I was 23 at the time, leading these group of people up this mountain. And she said, wow, you're so unflappable. And I thought it was such a funny word. I'd never heard that word before. And I recognized that it was actually complimentary of someone who just goes the course under periods of stress or anxiety or just, uncertainty, to be unflappable. And I realized that being unflappable is such a key characteristic of leaders in leadership, because you think about the people who will follow you are those people that you can look at under periods of stress and anxiety and unknown and uncertainty, and how they deal with a situation. And you might witness people who are just really anxious and feel really nervous and moving around really quickly. And you realize, at least I realize, that being unflappable is a way to calm everybody else down in your team and your employees. And so I ended up using that title as Unflappable Leadership Lessons from Climbing Mountains. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but the whole idea of, for me, for climbing mountains is, and being in the outdoors and all the unknowns and all the uncertainties that people experience in the outdoors, I use in my coaching practice as a metaphor for everything that people go through in their own lives. So much uncertainty, what one has to do to reach their potential or reach their summit in their life. You got to put one foot in front of the other, because if you don't, you'll never get to the summit, whatever that summit or that potential is. And I'm not sure we ever recognize what our potential really is, because it always seems to, the stick tends to move every time we get a little bit closer to that potential. But it's there. Their potential is there, and you feel it, you know, when you reach it. But there's always something a little bit more after that. But if you're not moving, if you're not putting one foot in front of the other, it's really tough to be able to reach whatever that potential is. And then I use other uncertainties like storms in your life. You know, what do you do the times that we're out in storms in the wild outdoors, and how do people react? And oftentimes in storms, in real life situations, or in storms that you find in the outdoors, that people tend to go within and they forget about the people that are around them. But in leadership, the challenge and the success of leadership is when you keep from going within and paying attention to everybody around you. How do you bring value? How do you take care of other people around you in stormy situations? So in the darkness in your own life that you have experienced at periods of your life, people tend to go in. But if you take the opportunity to go out and ask about other people and taking care of other people and paying attention to other people, magical things happen. And oftentimes I'll use those metaphors as I'm coaching clients in rough situations and helping them progress and move up in their business or in their life. Some of the chapters that I talk about, and I think Janine at the beginning of today talked about this Mastermind in the Mountain program that I do with business owners and entrepreneurs and leaders. And it's usually a small group of people, 5 or 6 people. And we join in on a Friday morning, and usually 8 o'clock, and about 4 hours later we end. And we usually hike about 5, maybe 6 miles. And I live here in Colorado. It's a perfect place to go hiking. And I'll choose a topic that's related to their business or personal life, and then they usually overlap each other. And I tend to do activities along the way. So boundaries, we've talked about boundaries and decision-making and communication. We talked about DISC, D-I-S-K, personality and behavioral profiles. We talked about voice and the value of voice. I think Doreen, if she's here, I can't see her right at my screen, but that was a really cool program on that particular day. But what I know is when taking people in the great outdoors and in nature, people feel safe, very comfortable. They can wear whatever they want. They don't have to wear any makeup. They don't have to dress like the nines. They can just come as they are. And just being surrounded in nature helps people to feel more authentic and safe to be able to share, deeper things. These are strangers. They don't know each other. We do basic introductions and we do the first activity, and boom, they start from superficial to boop, right down to the core of what they're feeling and experiencing in their own lives and their business. And that's the magic of the Mastermind on the Mountain. And 4 hours later, people are exchanging business cards and getting to know each other and communicating outside of the Mastermind on the Mountain. And so one of the ways, out of a number of ways that I sell my books, is through this Mastermind on the Mountain. In addition to social media, I will also do different gimmicks along the year. I did a Black Friday special last year that I had an opportunity to sell both of my books. During a Black Friday special, I had the books up in front of a dog, and I had up against Santa, and I did a reel, and I sold quite a few books just because of the reel was, had great music, and it was fun energy along the way to sell the books. I thought that was kind of a neat way to do that. So creative gimmicks, and I'm open to, hearing what other people do too. But that's one of the ways. And I think one of the things that Deb mentioned is to keep your book alive. And I second that wholeheartedly. One of the books that I just recently used in my coaching practice was The Four Agreements. Anybody know this book? Yeah, Four Agreements. It's a cool book, and it's 20 some years old. So the point is to keep your book alive, you got to keep it out there, either on, in social media or the gimmicks. Doesn't matter when it was published. My first book was published in 2020. My second book was published in 2022. So those are fairly recent, but I'm hoping in 20 years, people will not have forgotten about it, or I won't have forgotten about it, and continue to keep it up so that people will still want to buy it. It'll still be applicable. I think the point is that keeping it alive and relevant to what's going on in our culture, our society, and people's lives, and how that can be a benefit for people. I think that's critical. So both of my books are, outdoor related, and but it's not to the point where only people in the outdoors would pick it up. And I think it's based on the description of the book and the chapters of the book. And I talk about team. I talk about the dangers of making assumptions and the mishaps that I've experienced when I've taken people out on climbs or different expeditions. So that's the nugget that they learn from that story, but it can be easily transferred to anyone's life. So I'm going to stop there, and I have a question for everybody else that get us sort of warmed up. Let me find my question. What makes you uncomfortable or nervous or anxious?
Unexpected questions. I'm just kidding. Who would like to go first?
I'll do some.
So
the question is, what makes me nervous or anxious?
Anxious or uncomfortable? Like, what's an uncomfortable situation you find yourself in, or makes you nervous? Or
when it actually makes me nervous when people know who I am and I don't know who they are. And I know that's something I have to get over, because part of what I do is, especially for building my business, is I have videos and I talk about things. And so when people meet me and it's like they know more about me than I do about them, that kind of it feels uncomfortable to me.
why? What part of that makes you feel uncomfortable? That they know more about
I don't
you
know.
than you know?
I think because I don't know what they think about that. Like I kind of feel like it's an unbalanced, like it's not fair. Like if I maybe knew more about them, then I'd be like it'd be more fair exchange, I guess. I don't
know. That's good. That's a good. So it makes you feel anxious or uncomfortable?
I don't know. What's the difference?
Does it keep you from wanting to communicate with them openly, or?
It used to. It doesn't anymore. It used to. I think when I was younger, it was harder for me to feel like I could stand on my own. Like I was a single mom for a while, and so I felt like I had so much that I had to process. And that was just one of the things that I was like, I can easily cut that out and I don't need to process that. And so that was kind of how I dealt with it back then. I used to be a musician, and so that started happening at that point when I started seeing success, and I wasn't ready for it. but I'm married now. It's not just me. My kids are grown, so I have less to deal with. And so I feel like this is the time that if I am going to be able to deal with it, now would be the time that I don't have an excuse to not. You know what I mean?
Mhm. So how do you deal with it?
I think that I do my best to be authentic when I do represent myself. And then that way, whether they like me or not is irrelevant because I'm just being me and I can't be anything other than that. So it causes less anxiety, I guess, than it used to. Because I used to, I think I used to worry like what people thought about me.
So if you've ever asked somebody, well, I know about you because you play, whatever, you said you were a musician.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense that they know something about you, but you don't know something about somebody that's been in the audience or has
Right.
you've seen, right?
Right.
So do you ask them, what, how do you find the balance that they know something about you, but you don't know anything about them?
Well, it does seem to make sense that I could then, gear the conversation to ask about them because they already know stuff about me, right? So then I can show an interest in them, which is I think a natural way of having a conversation anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Shiraz could probably step in on this one too. Anybody else have something they want to share? Something that makes them has anybody spent any time in the outdoors, or does anybody spend any time outside or go on hikes, or has anybody ever gone climbing or canoeing or hugged a tree?
A lot. We garden.
Garden, yeah.
Yeah. We grow vegetables. We used to sell at the farm market until we lost the use of the land that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And walking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think digging in the dirt and feeling the soil is very therapeutic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else spend any time outside?
Not for a while.
Yes.
We used to go camping, and I've climbed a mountain, but recently, I think the closest I've got to really saying I've been outdoors is when we were in Boise. We drove up into the mountains to the hot springs and just hung out in the hot springs. Not a lot of hiking involved. It's more just laying down in warm water.
Well, there's just so much more research that has come out about the health benefits of being in nature. Psychologically, mentally for sure. And just your overall, your physical health. Walking in nature, I've oftentimes said to people when you're feeling really anxious and they're inside, go outside. Go outside, breathe in the fresh air, be in nature, see some trees, touch some dirt, look at the leaves, pick up a group of leaves, something, and magic happens. It happens every single time. And I think we spend much more time inside, many of us do, than we do outside. And, when you think about our agrarian society back in the day, yeah, people were more healthy then, I think, in many ways, because they utilized the outdoors and nature as their, everyday being. And we've lost so much of that, I think. So you don't have to climb a mountain to really get the health benefits of being in nature. And you don't have to, raft a river. But if you do, when I talk about one of the questions I asked about you, when was the last time you felt anxious or nervous about something? And one of the things that I used to do with students is when they were doing a climb and they get this thing called a sewing machine leg. they get really nervous on the rock, and their leg would start to wiggle, and they'd get really nervous. And it's very common for beginner climbers. And they're like, I'm going to slip. And they have this really anxious voice. I'm going to fall. Hold on to me. Don't let me fall. And I would just say in a very unflappable voice, tell your feet to stay, and they will stay. And guess what? They did. So the student would continue to climb, get to the top, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how that worked. So apply that. If Doreen's here again, I don't know if Doreen's here or even Shiraz, the belief that your feet, if you tell your feet they're going to stay, they'll stay. But it's got to be the belief, right, Shiraz? I'm sure you sort of get that. The belief that your feet are going to stay, and magical things happen for students. I mean, it seems so simple, but those are the kind of concepts that I often use over and over again in coaching and working with clients and in speaking, and how those simple kinds of things, health benefits and living a meaningful life and reaching your potential and finding your purpose, I think are things that I'm passionate about because of my own experience. I think about Steve Harvey. Everybody know who Steve Harvey is? Little Big Shots. What's the game show that he does? The comedian, Steve.
Family Feud.
Family Feud. Yeah.
Family Feud. Well, he shares a very similar story that I do, and I didn't know this. About 6 months ago, I saw an interview with him, and he shared his story of when he was in his early 20s, and he was writing comedy and jokes for a comedian that went on stage a couple nights a week. And he would write the jokes and then hand it to the comedian, and then he would go about his way. And one day the comedian said, Steve, why don't you come to the comedy club tonight and just sit in the audience and just hear your own jokes? Steve's like, well, okay. And again, he's in his early 20s. He's really going nowhere. I think at that time he had already had a child and just not doing really well in his life. So he's sitting in the audience. He and his friend went to this comedy club, and they're sitting in the audience. And finally, the comedian said, hey, Steve, in the audience, why don't you come up here and tell us one of your jokes? And he was so nervous. He was just flabbergasted by this opportunity and just didn't know what to do. Was really nervous about this. So he wanders up on the stage and he tells a joke, and that went pretty good. And then the comedian says, just tell us one more. And so he went about telling another joke, and he got such applause from the audience. He had no idea. So on the way home, he was in the passenger seat, and his friend driving the car looks over to Steve, and Steve's got his head in his hands and he's crying. And the guy's like, what is going on? What's wrong with you? He's like, you have no idea just what happened. You have no idea just what happened. And guess where he is now? I mean, a chord was struck, and this is what he's been doing for the rest of my life, the rest of his life. And I thought, he's telling my story. That's exactly me. And he worked the next couple of years. He made like $1,200 the following year. Then he made like $5,000 the next year. And then he continued to build on that, but it wasn't the money that was driving him. It was the spirit, his passion, that was moving him down this line. He didn't care. He was just so on fire with what just transpired on stage. And his stage is comedy. My stage was climbing mountains. But for him, I would venture to say it was less about the comedy, but more about what happened to him in his own spirit that drove him to a place he'd never imagined he'd be. And so when people sort of bumble around and wander around, they're living life, they're doing their thing, whatever that thing is, but there's a difference in recognizing and everybody has a purpose. We're all, on this earth for a reason and what that purpose is. And I mean, if you spend time and reflect and really think about the themes in your life that really you get excited about and that you find passion in, they might not be the same exact job, but there are things that you can connect the dots that'll help you recognize what your purpose is, because it shows up in all that you do. And it's like a magnet. Oh, I'm doing this, because you're just drawn to that naturally. And it's your life's purpose. It's not just one thing, it's a multitude of things. It's just finding the themes that run throughout your whole life. And it becomes easier for you to make decisions. Whether you are looking for another job, should I be doing this or should I be doing that? And if it doesn't align with your purpose, chances are you're going to go with the decision that aligns with your purpose. And it actually makes life much more enjoyable and a lot less stressful when you can recognize what that theme is, what that purpose is. And yeah.
Could I ask a question, Renee? Because of your time spent outdoors, and I feel like you are probably uniquely qualified to comment on this. What is it about being out in nature that, in your opinion, allows us to have clarity when we're looking for answers like life purpose or contemplating deeper, more meaningful things? What is it about nature that brings that clarity?
Great question. I think the lack of distraction. I mean, that's the biggest thing, because we're so easily distracted by what other people are doing and what's trendy and what's important and how to get ahead and all those things. And you get outdoors, and I mean, you can bring technology with you. You have those choices, but to help you to define who you are and what your direction is you got to get rid of the stuff. You got to get rid of the stuff. You got to get rid of the distractions, other people, things that pull you away, and center you, things that will center you, and just putting one foot in front of the other. And eventually it comes, because you're musing, you're with your own self. And the best leadership characteristic starts with you. I mean, leadership is you. It starts with you, who you are and where you're going and how you plan to bring value to other people. So it's the distractions, and then just authenticity of just being in nature.
I see Mary had her hand up.
Yeah, I think it's also the lack of walls. You know, we're sitting in rooms where we're all closed in. And when you're outside, it's just endless. You know, it's the horizon, and wherever you can see are the walls. You know, whether you're in the forest or up on a cliff, it's just endless. And the fresh air as well. You know, you can, whether it's raining. I love being out in the rain now. When we did the farm market, we had to harvest out in the rain, and I just got used to being out in the rain again, and it's marvelous. It's just so refreshing, and the air that you breathe in is very refreshing as well. So there's many pieces to the value of being outside.
Thank you for that input. Absolutely. When I first started teaching, I was teaching outdoors, doing things outdoors. And when I got into the classroom where there were walls and ceilings, I was so nervous. I just was like, I don't know if I could do this. I mean, there's desks out there. I had a podium. There's a blackboard. I just was nervous about that. Something about the outdoors made me feel it's just so natural. And so it took me a while to get used to the walls and the ceiling and the desks. So that's a really good point that you made. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I would invite people to really put that in your daily habit, is go outside. Go outside every day. You don't have to climb a mountain. You can just take a nice walk in a nice park and just, I think you feel safe enough. You can do it by yourself. Maybe not have to listen to a podcast or be on the phone. I see this all the time. Just be with you and yourself. I mean, magical things happen. Great thoughts. I have the best thoughts when I'm in nature. That just are creative thoughts that I don't know where they come, but they just come because, I'm thinking about, the next presentation or the next coaching client or something that it just allows me to be more creative in my thoughts. Are there other questions? So who's going to spend the next day and start a habit of going outside for a half an hour? It's okay. It's not scary. And even if it does rain a little bit, it's okay. There's no such thing as bad weather. It's bad clothing. You've heard that? So you bring an umbrella.
I feel guilty though. I will spend time outside. My chickens need cared for. My dogs need exercised, and I love spending time outside with them. But after hearing you speak, I'm feeling like maybe a mountain or at least a hill ought to be in my future. I'm not getting much cardio out there just throwing a ball for the dogs.
Well, good. I'm glad that was a little inspiration for you.
I noticed a difference for this was years ago. My older son is on the autism spectrum, and there was a lot of things that, like physical activity, that he was just he lacked a lot of gross motor skills, so he didn't have the coordination, and so sports and stuff like that was just, he couldn't manage that. He'd have meltdowns and whatever. But I took him hiking, I think the first time he was maybe 7 or 8 or something. And it was like he was a different kid, and I had no idea if he would even be willing to hike the whole time. I thought, well, even if we just go for 10 minutes, at least we're going. But that kid, he just kept going, and he would have gone longer if the hike was longer. And yeah, he was like in his glory. And so we started hiking more often because I realized, for one, he needed to be outside. 2, he needed exercise, but it actually, like, he was calmer, and he listened better. Like when I had to give him instructions, he was actually responsive. And so, yeah, like being outdoors, just, it was so good for him.
Mm-hmm. That's a perfect point, Jacqueline. Absolutely. Kids or adults. I mean, there's a lot of adults with ADHD too, or you didn't say ADHD, but you talked about, on the spectrum. Absolutely, 100%. There's all kinds of research about what that does for any child with a disability, any adult with a disability or a limitation of some sort, what that does to their overall attention span, focus, behavior. And we talked in another breakout room a couple of hours ago about a group of adolescents that a gentleman was taking when he was young, and he worked at a camp that worked with adolescents with behavioral issues. Well, yes, of course, it makes a difference. And then you throw a challenge in that, and you recognize that they can do something they never thought they could do, and what that does to one's worth and value and how they see themselves. And again,
also their enjoyment in life. Like, it's such a relief as a parent to figure out something that kids enjoy. My son's ADHD, so yeah, they're terrible in sports. Like, when someone got hit with a soccer ball, my son went over to make sure he was okay instead of continuing to play. Or we tried football, and he stood in the middle of the field and had no idea what to do. And they were concerned about his safety because he could have been in the line of the ball and he wouldn't have known the difference. But Taekwondo, it was his thing. But there was funny when the sensei asked him, they do questions so that they learn about Taekwondo and what was the capital of Korea. And my son said Ottawa, because that was all he came to mind. and the sensei and everybody was just so respectful and said thank you, and just moved on. It was just wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, and I think in some ways, and there's so many people I know that just don't capitalize on the outdoors, and it's okay, but it's really accessible. It's really accessible. It's easy. It doesn't cost anything. You don't have to be a certain person. You don't have to be a certain color. You don't have to, there's nothing. There's so much freedom in the outdoors.
You can go at your own pace. Yeah.
There's no competition. You just go outside, people. Go outside. And so when I talk about leadership, what's that got to do with leadership? People ask me, what's the outdoors? Well, for me, it started with recognizing who I was and my potential as a leader being in the outdoors, because that's where I discovered me. And wherever your place is, you'll discover you. But for me, it was the outdoors. And so so much of what I learned about leadership, about character and integrity and showing up and being present and working hard and respecting other people, all those things in groups. I mean, building a team and what it means to be a team, and how to deal with conflict. And then in the outdoors, when you're with people for a month, there's a lot of conflict that goes on. I learned that in the outdoors. And it's not something like you can, and I think it's the best way, because there's no place to run. Oftentimes in conflict, you can easily like close the door or leave the house, or, not see the person at work for a week or something. But in the outdoors, you have to sit down, you got to deal with conflict, and you got to work on communication. So leadership is, for me, it was founded in how I utilize the outdoors, and that's how I transfer that into my keynotes and the things that I do with my coaching clients. And it is just really enjoyable. I see the benefits for so many people. So it's 2:47. Does anybody have questions or have a story? I will have to, I'll share one more thing, and then I would love to hear more stories from other people. I will be 68 in April, and I am taking a group to Nepal to go to Everest Base Camp and climb a couple of peaks there. Now, I'm no spring chicken, but I have been there. This will be my 6th time going and 5th time taking people there, because I love introducing people to challenging opportunities that are in nature, because I see the immediate transfer to their everyday life and what it does for them in their value, how they value themselves, how they want to bring value to other people, how they want to work hard and reach their potential, and all of those things. So I'm taking 6 women, all from the ages from 30 to my age. And I'm really excited about it, because these are people who are, it's on their bucket list. And for those of you who are in business and do this, you know what that means, because you're the person who's providing this opportunity for them. And that's what I'm feeling. That it's not just, when I used to be a professor, I used to take students to Nepal. And so they got credit and they had a great experience too. But this is a little bit different, because these people are really have volunteered to go. It's on their bucket list. And I feel, elated to be able to bring that value to them. So stay tuned for how that goes next April.